Welcome to episode 6 of the Psychological Safety series, where we discuss Dr. Nicolas Abella's article How to Apply Psychological Safety in Friendships, Family, and Personal Life. This podcast is hosted by James Carter, BSN, RN, an ICU nurse with frontline experience in high-pressure environments. Emily Ramirez, MSN, RN, a nurse manager passionate about fostering open communication and strong team collaboration. In today's episode, James and Emily explore how psychological safety extends beyond the workplace and into our personal relationships. While psychological safety is often discussed in professional settings, it is equally important in friendships, family dynamics, and social interactions. Have you ever hesitated to share your feelings out of fear of judgment? Avoided a difficult conversation with a loved one because it felt too uncomfortable? Felt like you had to walk on eggshells rather than be your authentic self? Research confirms that psychological safety is not just a workplace concept. It is the foundation of trust, emotional well-being, and lasting relationships. When psychological safety is missing, relationships become strained, communication breaks down, and people feel disconnected. In this episode, James and Emily will discuss how to recognize when psychological safety is lacking in personal relationships, the hidden consequences of emotional suppression and avoidance in friendships and family dynamics, research-backed strategies to build trust, encourage open communication, and strengthen personal connections. The CONNECT framework, a structured approach for fostering psychological safety outside of work. Psychological safety is not just about avoiding conflict. It is about creating an environment where honesty, vulnerability, and open communication strengthen relationships rather than harm them. By the end of this discussion, you will have practical steps to apply psychological safety in your own life, helping you build deeper friendships, improve family communication, and engage in more meaningful professional and social interactions. Let's begin.
Welcome back to the Healthcare Nurses Network podcast, you guys. We're always looking for ways to help you thrive, and today we're really diving into something that I think impacts all of us, no matter what, and that's psychological safety, but not in the way that you normally think about it. We're not talking about, feeling safe at work today.
Right.
We're going to be looking at how psychological safety impacts our personal lives, our friendships, and our families.
It's everything. Yeah.
Everything, really.
It does touch everything.
Yeah. And we're going to be taking a deep dive into the work of Dr. Nicolas Abella. Have you heard of him?
Yes. Familiar with his work.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So he has some really interesting thoughts about how this all works.
He does.
And we're going to be kind of pulling out some of those key insights. And I think this is going to really change how you approach your relationships.
I think so, too.
So have you ever felt like, even with people you're really close to, you can't truly be yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I think most people have felt that way at some point or another.
Yeah. Or maybe you've had a friendship that just kind of fizzled out and you're not really sure why. It just felt like it never got
below the surface.
Below the surface. Yeah, exactly. And Dr. Abella, he really gets into why that happens and what we can do about it.
Right.
So I want to start with something he said that I thought was really interesting. He said, have you ever hesitated to express your emotions because you feared judgment or rejection?
Yeah.
And I was like,
ooh, that's me.
Right. I think that resonates with a lot of people.
It does. So what does that even mean to have psychological safety in our personal relationships?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. And it's a lot of people just kind of assume that our personal relationships should just naturally be safe spaces.
Right. Because these are people we love.
Exactly. You would think you should just automatically feel that sense of safety.
Yeah, you'd think.
But just like at work, psychological safety in our personal life, it doesn't just happen. It takes effort. It takes work.
Conscious effort.
Yes, conscious effort. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Dr. Abella, he actually connects this lack of psychological safety to a bunch of different consequences in our lives, like real world impacts.
Yes.
And I was kind of surprised by some of them.
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest ones is what he calls emotional suppression.
Okay.
And so think about it. Like, have you ever held back from telling someone how you really felt?
Yeah, all the time.
Because you were worried they might judge you or they might reject you. Or...
Totally.
So you just kind of keep it all bottled up inside.
Yeah. And what's the impact of that? Like, what happens when we do that over and over again?
Well, he actually uses this example of Sarah in his book, which I thought was really helpful.
Okay.
Sarah is a nurse, and she's completely burned out like so many of us are.
Right.
But she doesn't want to burden her family with her problems.
Okay.
So she ends up just, bottling up all of her emotions.
Oh, so she's like putting on a happy face when she's with them?
Exactly.
But then inside she's just like dying.
Yeah, and it just leads to more stress, and, over time it starts to actually strain those relationships.
Even though she's trying to protect them.
Exactly, even though she's trying to protect them by not sharing what's really going on.
That's so interesting. It's like she's trying to hold a beach ball underwater.
I love that analogy.
Like, eventually it's going to pop up.
Right, and probably not in the way that you want it to.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So it's not just about, not sharing the negative stuff, right?
Right.
What about the good stuff? Like, what about our wins and our joys?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we even hold back from sharing those things too because we're afraid of being seen as bragging or, maybe making someone else feel bad.
Right, yeah, or insensitive or something.
Yeah, exactly. And then what happens is our relationships end up feeling really one-sided.
Like you're only getting half the story.
Exactly. You're not getting the full picture.
So we end up with these really surface-level connections where no one's really being authentic.
Right. No one's really being their true selves.
And then that leads to another consequence that Dr. Abella talks about, which is avoiding those difficult conversations.
Oh, yeah, those are tough.
They are tough.
Yeah, he gives this example of Michael, who hasn't spoken to his brother in years because they had this huge disagreement about their mom's care.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So they're just like totally estranged now?
Basically. Yeah, it's
Oh,
like they just swept this huge issue under the rug, and now it's this giant elephant in the room.
It's so much easier to just avoid conflict, right?
Right, in the short term, absolutely.
Yeah, but what happens when we do that over and over again?
Resentment builds up, communication breaks down, and the relationship just suffers.
So those issues never get resolved.
Exactly. And sometimes, they can even become like this wall between people, preventing them from ever really, truly connecting.
It's like sweeping dust under the rug, right?
It is perfect analogy.
It might look clean for a little while, but eventually it's just going to create a bigger mess.
Exactly. And this whole avoiding tough conversations thing, it's not just limited to family either. I mean, think about friendships that have kind of fizzled out because there was something left unsaid.
Oh.
Or, colleagues at work who just kind of keep things polite but never actually address the elephant in the room.
Right. Like everyone knows there's a problem, but no one wants to talk about it.
Exactly. And those situations, they just highlight how important it is to create space for these open and honest dialogues, even when they're uncomfortable.
Even when it's hard.
Yeah, even when it's really hard.
Well, and Dr. Abella even brings this online, right? He talks about how this affects how we interact online.
Oh, absolutely.
He mentions James, who is this nurse leader.
Yeah.
And he has all these great ideas about improving workplace culture, but he's afraid to share them on LinkedIn.
Because of the potential backlash.
Yeah, he's worried about the criticism or the negativity.
Yeah, which I totally get. You put yourself out there and you never know what you're going to get back.
You're vulnerable, yeah.
Exactly. And it makes you realize how much we're all missing out on because we're so afraid of not feeling psychologically safe.
So we talked about all these consequences of not having psychological safety, but is there any science to back this up?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Or is it just, a feel-good concept?
No, there's actually a lot of research out there that shows that people who feel psychologically safe in their relationships, they have lower levels of cortisol, which is the stress hormone.
Ah, so it actually affects our physical health.
Exactly.
Wow.
It leads to better mental health, better sleep.
Improved immune system.
Yeah.
All of that.
That's amazing. It's not just about feeling better emotionally. It actually impacts our physical well-being, too.
Exactly. It's all connected.
And there's research on couples, too, right?
Oh, yeah. They've done studies that show that psychological safety is one of the biggest predictors of relationship satisfaction and whether a couple stays together long term.
So the couples that feel safe to be vulnerable with each other,
right,
they actually have stronger and longer-lasting relationships.
Right. Wow. So how do we actually cultivate this sense of safety in our relationships? Like, where do we even begin? It feels a little abstract.
Yeah, it can feel that way. But luckily, Dr. Abella has this really practical framework that he calls CONNECT.
Okay. I like frameworks. Tell me more.
So he breaks down the concept of psychological safety into these 7 actionable pillars.
Okay.
And each one offers specific strategies for creating more authentic and supportive connections.
So this CONNECT framework, it's like our roadmap to building better relationships.
Exactly.
I like it. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Okay, so the first pillar is all about creating space for honest conversations.
Okay.
And that means really listening to understand, not just to
So
respond.
not just waiting for your turn to talk.
Exactly.
Like
It's
that.
about asking clarifying questions, validating the other person's feelings, and really replacing assumptions with curiosity.
So often we just jump into problem-solving mode.
Oh, I'm so guilty of that.
Me too, me too. Or we try to offer advice when what the person really needs is to just feel heard.
Exactly, just to feel like someone gets it.
Yeah, and that leads to the second pillar, which is opening up with vulnerability.
Oh, that one can be scary.
It can be scary.
It requires you to really let your guard down.
Show your true self.
Yeah, warts and all.
But it's through that vulnerability that we build that genuine connection and trust.
Absolutely.
It's like that quote, vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage.
I love that quote.
Me too. And Dr. Abella, he suggests using I statements to kind of express how you're feeling without blaming the other person.
That's so helpful.
So instead of saying, you always interrupt me,
Which nobody wants to hear.
right, you would say, I feel unheard when I'm interrupted.
Exactly. And it just shifts the focus from accusation to expressing your own needs.
That's a really great tip.
And the third pillar focuses on navigating those difficult conversations, but doing it with respect.
Oh, I need help with that one.
It's tough.
How do you even approach those conversations without it becoming a fight?
Well, Dr. Abella says the key is to go into it with a spirit of curiosity rather than judgment.
Okay, so like instead of you did this wrong,
Right.
it's more like help me understand why.
Exactly. Seek to understand their perspective, even if you don't agree with it.
So it's like replacing that fight or flight response with more of a listen and learn approach.
Exactly.
I like that. Okay, so the fourth pillar is nurturing deeper friendships.
Yes.
And this is all about moving beyond that small talk and really investing in those meaningful connections.
Yes. And I think this is especially important for nurses.
Absolutely.
We spend so much time caring for others that we often forget to nurture our own friendships and our own need for connection.
It's true. And so Dr. Bello, what does he say?
Well, he suggests asking more meaningful questions,
Okay.
really listening to the responses, and then sharing your own experiences and vulnerabilities in return.
So it's about creating that reciprocal space where both people feel seen and valued.
Exactly. It's not just about venting or complaining. It's about really connecting on a deeper level.
So the fifth pillar is establishing and respecting boundaries.
Yes.
And I think this one is often misunderstood.
Oh, absolutely.
People think the boundaries are selfish.
Right. Or mean.
Yeah, but really they're about protecting your own well-being.
Exactly. So that you can actually show up fully for others without burning yourself out.
This is a big one for me because I tend to overcommit and then I end up feeling resentful or exhausted.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can relate to that.
So how do we approach boundaries in a way that feels both assertive and compassionate?
Well, Dr. Abella recommends communicating your needs really clearly and directly.
So don't expect people to read your mind.
Yeah.
Just tell them what you need.
Exactly. And be confident about it, but also be compassionate.
Okay,
And then the other side of that is respecting the boundaries of others.
right.
If someone says they need space, honor that request.
Don't take it personally.
Exactly. It's about creating that mutual respect where everyone feels safe to express their needs and have those needs met.
Okay, 2 more pillars.
Yes, the sixth one is all about cultivating an environment of trust.
Trust is huge.
It really is. It's the foundation of any psychologically safe relationship.
So it's knowing that you can confide in someone and they won't judge you.
Exactly.
That they'll keep your secrets and they'll always have your back.
Right. And Dr. Abella talks about how trust is built through consistency, reliability, and a willingness to be vulnerable with each other.
Okay, so it's not just about words, it's about actions too.
Exactly.
And finally, the 7th pillar.
This one is all about taking small steps to strengthen that connection.
Okay.
Because building psychological safety, it's not about these grand gestures.
It's not about an overnight transformation.
Right. It's about making those small intentional efforts consistently over time.
I love that. It's
Yeah.
about those small, everyday actions that add up to something much bigger.
Exactly.
So instead of trying to overhaul all of our relationships at once, we can just choose one area to focus on and start making small changes.
Exactly. Pick one relationship where you want to see improvement and pick one strategy from Connect and just try it out.
I like that. Keep it simple.
Exactly. Just start somewhere and see what happens.
Awesome. Well, that's a great place to wrap up part 1 of our deep dive into psychological safety in relationships.
It is.
Remember, you can find more resources and support on our website, healthcarenurses.net, and connect with fellow nurses on the Nurses Link Up app, available on Apple and Google Play.
We'll be back in part 2 to talk about what happens when you're putting in all this effort to build psychological safety, but the other person isn't quite meeting you there.
Stay tuned.
So, as we were talking about this whole connect framework, I was thinking about how challenging it can be when you're the one putting in all the effort to build that psychological safety,
Yeah.
but the other person isn't quite meeting you there.
Yeah, it can be really discouraging, right? Like you're trying to be vulnerable and open up and have these honest conversations,
Right.
but they're still kind of closed off or defensive.
Yeah. Exactly. And it makes you wonder, is this even worth it?
Totally. And it
Yeah.
can make you want to give up.
Absolutely. But Dr. Abella, he really emphasizes that, our role is to model psychological safety, not to force it.
So we're not trying to change the other person or control them.
Right.
We're just focusing on our own actions and how we're showing up in the relationship.
Exactly. It's like you can't force a flower to bloom. You can give it sunlight and water and nutrients, but ultimately it has to open up on its own time.
That's such a good analogy.
I like that one.
Me too. But what if you've been doing that for a while? You've been modeling these behaviors, but you're still not seeing any change.
Yeah, it can be really disheartening.
It can.
But even if the other person isn't reciprocating right away, you're still getting the benefits of creating that safe space for yourself. You're honoring your own needs. You're expressing yourself authentically. You're setting healthy boundaries.
So in a way, it's a form of self-care.
Exactly. You're taking care of yourself.
And maybe eventually that will inspire the other person to open up too.
It might. And even if it doesn't, you're still showing up as your best self.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about applying this Connect framework to different types of relationships.
Okay.
Because it's one thing to understand the concepts,
Right.
but how do we actually put them into practice?
Yeah, that's the important part, right? So Dr. Abella, he gives some helpful examples.
Okay.
Let's start with friendships.
Okay.
He suggests really pushing ourselves to go deeper than just the surface level chit-chat.
So instead of just asking, how are you?
Right.
What could we say?
You could ask, what's been on your mind lately? Or what are you struggling with right now?
Oh, I like those.
Yeah, it just shows that you're really interested in what's going on in their life.
You're not afraid to go there.
Exactly. And that gives them permission to do the same.
What about family relationships? Those can be a little trickier.
Oh, yeah. Especially when there's a lot of history.
Or unresolved issues.
Right, all that baggage.
So how do we navigate those conversations without it becoming a fight?
Well, Dr. Abella, he suggests approaching it from a place of understanding and a desire to reconnect.
So instead of starting with, you always do this.
Right, which just puts them on the defensive.
It does.
You could try saying something like, I feel hurt when this happens, and I'd love to find a way for us to communicate better.
Well, that's a really good reframing.
It takes the blame out of it.
It does, and it shifts the focus to your own needs and feelings.
Exactly.
What about online relationships?
Yeah, surprisingly, this Connect framework can even apply to how we interact online.
Really?
Yeah, think about it. We can be intentional about engaging in thoughtful discussions,
Okay.
actively listening to different viewpoints, and being respectful even when we disagree.
It's about creating those online spaces where people feel safe to share their ideas
Exactly.
without being attacked.
Without being ridiculed or shamed.
What about romantic relationships?
Oh, absolutely. Connect is super important in romantic relationships.
So how would you apply it there?
Well, it starts with being willing to be vulnerable with your partner,
Okay.
sharing your fears and your insecurities, but also your hopes and your dreams.
Letting them see the real you.
Exactly. The good, the bad, and the ugly.
And being open to hearing theirs, too.
Exactly. It's a two-way street.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that this whole process of building psychological safety,
Yeah.
it's a journey. It's not a destination.
Absolutely. There are going to be times when we mess up.
When we fall back into old patterns.
Exactly.
When we get frustrated or discouraged.
It's all part of the process.
So we need to be patient with ourselves.
Yes. Self-compassion is key.
We're all learning and growing.
And if we can approach our relationships with that spirit of curiosity and openness and a willingness to learn,
Yeah,
I think we can create some really amazing connections.
I love that. So what are some key takeaways you want our listeners to remember from this deep dive?
Well, first and foremost, I want them to remember that psychological safety, it's not just a nice to have, it's a need.
It's essential.
It is. And the good news is it's something we can all cultivate.
We have the power.
We do. And that Connect framework, it gives us the tools to do just that.
So choose one relationship that you want to improve.
Right.
And pick one strategy from Connect and just try it.
You might be surprised by the results.
Awesome. We'll be back in part 3 to talk specifically about how all of this applies to you, our amazing listeners, on the front lines of healthcare.
Yes, because you guys are dealing with so much every day.
We know that, and we wanted to give you some practical strategies for taking care of yourselves.
And building that support system that you need to thrive.
In the meantime, don't forget to check out our website, healthcarenurses.net, for more resources and support and connect with fellow nurses on the Nurses Link Up app, available on Apple and Google Play. You know, we've been talking about how important psychological safety is in all our relationships, but now we really want to bring it home to you guys, our amazing nurse listeners.
Because we know that being a nurse, it's not just a job, it's a calling.
It is.
But it's also incredibly demanding.
Oh yeah, you guys face challenges every day that most people can't even imagine.
Right, and that's exactly why prioritizing psychological safety in your own life is so important.
Yeah, it's not selfish.
It's essential.
It's essential so you can be your best self, both at work and at home.
Think about it. You can't pour from an empty cup.
Ooh, I like that.
If you're not taking care of your own emotional well-being, you're not going to be able to provide that compassionate care that your patients need.
So true. So what can our listeners do to cultivate this sense of psychological safety outside of work?
Well, it starts with recognizing that your needs matter.
Like really recognizing that.
Yeah. It's okay to say no to that extra shift.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to ask for support when you're feeling overwhelmed.
And it's okay to set boundaries with family and friends who might not get it.
Right, because they haven't lived your life.
Exactly. And remember all those pillars of connect that we talked about?
Yes.
Those apply to your personal life just as much as your work life. So create space for those honest conversations with your loved ones.
Right. Let them know what you're struggling with.
What you need from them.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to open up and be vulnerable.
It's about building that support system outside of work where you can just be yourself.
Exactly. A place where you don't have to pretend everything's okay.
And remember, you're not alone in this.
No. There's a whole community of nurses out there who understand exactly what you're going through.
And that's where the Nurses Link Up app comes in.
Yes.
It's an amazing way to connect with other nurses, share your experiences, get support, and just know that you're not alone.
So what does all of this mean for you guys?
I think it means that you have the power to transform your relationships,
You do.
both at work and at home.
It starts with taking that first step.
Yeah, choose one relationship, pick one strategy from Connect, and just try it.
What have you got to lose?
And remember, we're here to support you every step of the way.
Absolutely.
You can find more resources on our website, healthcarenurses.net.
And connect with fellow nurses on the Nurses Link Up app, available on Apple and Google Play.
Thank you for listening to the Healthcare Nurses Network podcast.
We'll see you next time.